Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First, a brief introduction of myself. I'm from Jiangnan University School of Food Science and Technology. Many of you here, some of you here are alumni, our colleagues, as well as our peers and our friends. Today, I want to share some of my thoughts on heavy metal removal by probiotics and their application in dairy products. And my talk will include three parts. First, the prevention strategy of heavy metal hazards and its related treatment. Second, the removal, and third, the application of probiotics in dairy products and other foods. As we know that heavy metals includes like cadmium, lead, mercury, copper, arsenic, etc. In China, as we know, that heavy metal pollution is a quite serious problem among all of the pollution. In the land, over 80% of the pollution is due to heavy metal. Every year, there are about 12 million grain polluted by heavy metal in China, according to the statistics from the government. Heavy metal affect us because of our exposure to heavy metal through soil, water, crops, animals, etc. Through fodder, the pollution of heavy metal will go to animals. And through soil and water themselves, our crops are polluted, and therefore we are polluted. And besides food and water, there are also other sources of heavy metal pollution, for example, air emission, industrial waste, as well as our daily necessities, for example, cosmetics, toys, etc. And I would say that our exposure to heavy metal in daily life is quite high. Now, let's look at the heavy metal pollution in food in China. As I said earlier, in agriculture, heavy metal pollution is quite serious right now. If you look at different geographic locations, heavy metal pollution mainly is in Pearl River Delta region, Yangtze River Delta region, and the industrial base in the northeast of China. And for agriculture, most of the heavy metals are in wheat, peanuts, sunflowers, and tobacco. 44% of the food samples have been detected with cadmium. That is 7.3% higher than the required level. And that's the sample taken from all over China. And in Yangtze Delta region, 7.6% of the lead lead is 7.6% higher than the required level. And for aqua product, it's over 30%. And in Henan province, the mercury is 2% higher than the required level. And in the US, cadmium is the most common pollutant. And in China, it is also a very common pollutant. And there are both acute and chronic symptoms from pollution of cadmium. These include the problem with lungs, kidneys, reproductive organs, as well as cancer. The so-called cadmium rise events recently caused lots of attention. Actually, in the history, in Japan, the cadmium pollution in a river caused lots of disease. And recently in Xiang River area, where there are lots of rice grown, we also saw some similar disease, especially in Guangdong. And that caught a lot of attention. Actually, in some parts of China, the cadmium content or concentration in rice in some parts of China is still very high. Some can reach as high as 1 milligram per kilogram. So that's also quite serious. Lead exposure is also common. According to IAEA, around the world, about 120 million people exposed in a environment where there is too much lead. According to WHO, 10.45% of Chinese children have too much blood lead level, and the acute toxicity has the symptoms like noxious, renal failure, death, etc. For chronic symptoms, there are renal damage, infertility for adults, hypoprenia, skeletal dysplasia for children. And especially children under 6 years old, they are especially susceptible to lead exposure. And we do see some of the blood lead problem in children in some of the parts of China, and lots of them is because of the mining industry, metallurgy industry, as well as the manufacturing of batteries. Chemical plants is also another very important source of exposure of lead. We see a lot of media reports on this, especially in Shanxi. There is a village, I'm not sure whether it is accurate, that by 2001, 36 people died from the overlevel of too much lead, and that is related to the emission from those industries. Conventional treatment of too much lead exposure or heavy metal exposure is chelation therapies. If it's not too severe, for example, it's just a moderate toxicity, and then there are things that you can do to alleviate the damages caused by the exposure to those heavy metals. And then, of course, the second thing you need to do is reduce the exposure. This chelation therapies, of course, also has its side effect. I talked to Professor Yan in Shanghai, a medical doctor. We have this kind of mutual visits, regular visits. He's from Xinhua Hospital. Shanghai Xinhua Hospital is a designated hospital for the treatment of heavy toxicity from heavy metal. As far as I know, that chelation therapy, which I used to think is very good, but that day, Professor Yan told me that the treatment usually goes for a few days and then stop for several months, and then it will go again for several days. It needs a very long relapse time or recover time because this kind of therapy is just too much. And the chelation will help your body to purge lots of heavy chemical from your body. At the same time, it can also purge lots of nutrients from your body too. Dietary treatment has its strengths. Here you can see that there are all kinds of research reports of dietary strategies. For example, use zinc, selenium, all kinds of essential elements, as well as vitamins, vitamin E, vitamin C. And there is also a big demand for fruits and vegetables in treatment. For example, soybean, onion, curry, and plant extracts can also help. For example, there are all kinds of those plant extracts here. But however, those dietary strategy has its limits too. To reach a visible effect, you need a huge amount of those dietary elements. But as we all know that in our daily dietary intake, we won't be able to get such a huge amount of intakes. And also for some of those compounds, it's not good to health if it is taken in a huge quantity. In our labs, we are, for the past several years, we have been using the microbials. We use probiotics to remove the heavy metal. It came to us all of a sudden that probiotics may be a very good way to remove heavy metal from the human body. We found that microorganisms are used to very often take away the pollutants from the air, etc. But probiotics is rarely used. And among all of the microorganisms, it is the safest for human to eat, to take in the body. And we also found that some of those elements that we found in the dairy product can also be very helpful in removing those heavy metals. For example, lactobacillus. But of course, we have been using it outside of the human body, not inside of human body so far. Lactobacillus is also very helpful in as a antioxidant. But the problem with this is that it helps alleviate heavy metal pollution, but it may have induced oxidative stress. So we believe probiotics is much better in terms of removing heavy metal and at the same time serve as an antioxidant. Probiotics is good for intestinal health, as we know. So it is very helpful in protecting your intestines from heavy metal pollution. Well, if you think about the treatment of heavy metal pollution, and you will find a lot of those reports are from our labs, but the first one on human body is not from us. About last year or the year before last year, in 2014, on a magazine called FBIF, which is a very good magazine, there is a professor from Canada, Professor Reed, and he is the president of Probiotics Association of WHO, and he went to Africa and did some study on human body. He used yogurt and on thousands of women and children. He used his own lab. And then he found some results. For example, with this yogurt, it can help to reduce the impact from cadmium and arsenic, but not so much for lead. So this is a lab report, the first lab report on the application of probiotics on human body. And lots of what we have been doing are also based on his work, and he knows our lab very well too. Now, I'd like to talk about the biological removal of heavy metals by probiotics. The first thing we do is lead and also cadmium as well as copper. We are also doing aluminum, but not so much. We are exposed to aluminum a lot, and too much exposure to aluminum is not good either. We are also doing some research on arsenic. In our lab, most of the tests are done on animals. We did some on human, but I won't elaborate on those things here.
And this is our idea, or our assumption. We believe if we are able to find a good probiotics, it must have the following criteria. First of all, it must have a very good heavy metal binding ability. Second, it must be highly tolerant to heavy metal. Number three, the probiotics must be antioxidant. And last but not least, the probiotic must be tolerant to gastrointestinal environment, because we know the pH level in people's stomach is very low. So this probiotics must be tolerant to this kind of environment. And there are a lot of different enzymes and proteins within people's stomach. So for a probiotic to remove heavy metal, it must be tolerant to gastrointestinal environment. And the first study we had is against lead, second, cadmium. And we chose FBIF2016 as our experiment, and we won a gold award for our experiment. So I want to talk to you more about this probiotics in dealing with cadmium. In all the testing probiotics, you can see the picture on the upper right hand. It shows the binding ability for cadmium as well as the tolerance level. And we found this probiotics has a very high level of tolerance towards cadmium, about 1,000 milligrams per liter, 20 times that of other probiotics. So anti-oxidative ability, and we found this probiotic 86110 has very good removability for free agent, and in our labs we also have a comparative experiment, and we found two different probiotics may have similar ability in terms of antioxidant tolerance. This experiment shows that its tolerance to gastrointestinal environment. We simulated human stomach, and we found CCFM8610 has very high tolerance to gastrointestinal environment. You can see from this picture that the cadmium is not continuous. That means it has a very unique way of binding cadmium. On the right-hand side, you'll be able to see the cadmium binding photomicrographs. I think this kind of research is very valuable. It has the ability to absorb or bind cadmium not only physically. That was our initial idea. It has the physical ability to bind cadmium, but also it has in vitro binding capacity using protein. If we take a closer look, you'll find that most of the cadmium is bind to the wall of the cell. We also did experiment on cadmium binding isotope. With our calculation, we'll be able to calculate the maximum binding capacity at 24.69 milligrams per gram, 2 times of other alternatives. And this kind of binding is in line with our model. That means the binding has 2 approaches, one physical, the other is ion exchange. We also did experiment on cadmium binding kinetics. From the right side, you'll be able to see that it complies with Weber-Morris model for the cadmium binding. And in our animal experiments, we found 8610 has strong capacity inhibiting intestinal absorption of cadmium. So in feces, you'll be able to see a high level of cadmium with animals which took these probiotics. That is to say, with the use of these probiotics, cadmium is more easily to be taken out from the body. And we also compared different probiotics, and we found 8610 has the best effect. Other probiotics may have other features, for example, higher tolerance towards oxidants and higher binding capacity for cadmium. But on balance, 8610 is the best alternative. And it can also help recover the viability of intestinal cells. Because cadmium may cause a lot of free radicals, which will kill intestinal cells. But with 8610, the intestinal cells are able to recover. Protection on gut barrier. With the exposure of heavy metal, then the cells on the gut will change, and it will be very easy in dangerous people to absorb cadmium. And there's a close relationship between the absorption level and the tight junction of mRNA expression. If there's a high level of intake, then it shows the protection is poor. But with 8610, the gut barrier is better protected. Moreover, it can also help regulate intestinal microecology. With exposure of cadmium, the diversity of bacteria in people's gut will change. And 8610 is also able to regulate people's intestinal microecology so that the immune system will recover. So what about other tissues? The second bar shows cadmium exposure. The third one shows the exposure level with probiotics. And we found the third one is much lower. So that means with the use of CCFM8610, the level of cadmium can be greatly decreased in people's body. You see, this is the level of cadmium, much lower than before. And we found the same results in people's blood. So with the use of CCFM8610, the tissue pathological damage can be alleviated. So compared with the second column, all these numbers have greatly decreased. Of course, we have only been working on this project for 4 to 5 years, and I myself published 10 papers in SCI and a few in AM, and we applied 11 patents, and we got 4. And we also applied 6 international patents, and we were authorized with 3, including in the US and in Europe. And last year we won the Gold Award. And in 2013, it was regarded as one of the top 100 inventions in Jiangsu province. And last but not least, I want to talk to you about the application of probiotics in dairy products and other foods. Dairy products are very important, and it is also today's topic. These probiotics, or CCFM, represents probiotics created by our lab. If we put these probiotics into dairy products, soy milk products, fruits, vegetables, rice, flour, candy, chocolate, and tablets, then their health function can be greatly improved. And we have already applied this probiotic in yogurt products. Take CCFM8610, for example. It cannot grow very well in dairy products, but if we put some growth agent, it will be able to grow in dairy products. And these probiotics are also able to remove cadmium. Of course, the content of this probiotics is very low. And we can also apply these probiotics in flavored yogurt. Fermented soy milk can also use these probiotics. And we found with the use of these probiotics, the level of cadmium inside the body, in livers, can be greatly decreased. With the fermentation process, some healthy content within the soy milk can also be improved or increased. Application of probiotics in fruits and vegetables. We experimented on cucumbers and tomatoes. And we found after fermentation, these probiotics are able to reduce heavy metal within the vegetables and fruits. Applications of probiotics in rice and flour products. In the processing procedure, there is some level of heavy content in rice and flour. For example, some rice is heavily polluted by cadmium. But this product or these probiotics are not able to remove cadmium from the rice in a dry environment. In dry environment, things will be more complicated. If you simply use these probiotics to remove cadmium from the rice, then you will also create a lot of polluted water. So we can have more discussion about this application. Moreover, we can put these probiotics in chocolate. And we have applied for a patent. Why? Because probiotics are easily killed in a liquid environment. But for chocolate, it is solid, so the environment is much more stable. Well, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Thank you very much.
现场有没有提问？
Questions?
那非常感谢
Thank you very much, Professor. I think this is a cutting-edge technology. Oh, question from here. Professor Chen, have you ever done some human experiments with these probiotics? Well, let me put it this way. We have done experiments on human body regarding lead, but on a very small scale. We haven't done any large-scale experiment on human body. We plan to, but we need to get approval first. What we are doing is beneficial for mankind, but we also met a lot of barriers because local governments may have their concerns regarding the health level of their people. But for some industries, for example, mine and metallurgy industries, people know they are exposed to hazardous environment, but they don't want to lose their jobs, so they do not want to be part of the experiment. And we have done a lot of experiments on animals. And we did 4 experiments on human bodies. Mainly on lead. And after 4 weeks, the lead level in people's blood can be reduced by 50%.
Then I have a follow-up question. Well, for this kind of bacteria that using 8010, do you have any special things about the bacteria? Well, for probiotics, there was a misunderstanding that the level of the bacteria should be fixed, but you don't have to be a fixed value of level, because if it is a fixed level, then it's probably not good for your intestines. And probiotics serve as kind of root. And according to our study, it will go to a peak level and then will go down. Our test on human and animals like mice, that with this kind of bacteria from probiotics, the amount of cadmium in the feces detected is much higher. That means it helped to remove those heavy metal from the bodies. And we also may have probiotics from other intakes, from other dietary intakes, and then the bacteria will bind with heavy metal, and that will effectively reduce the amount of heavy metal accumulated in the body. The other thing is that those bacteria will inhibit the absorption of those heavy metals by your intestines. And third, there are lots of anti-deoxidative that can help you to reduce the level of the heavy metals in your body, and therefore help you to remove the heavy metals from your body. Heavy metals like lead can stay in the body for very long, and it takes a very, very long time for it to get out of your body. Professor Chen, I have two questions. First questions first. On your last PowerPoint slide, you talked about the application in chocolate. But chocolate has a very low water activity. But if you put probiotics in it, have you ever tested the first month, the second month, until the 12th month, whether the bioactivity will go higher or lower, or stay the same? That's the first question. Well, for probiotics, they are first very sensitive to water, and secondly, they are sensitive to temperature, so we need to keep it at a low temperature. Different bacteria have different characteristics. Usually, it's about 0.3 for water. For good bacteria, for chocolate, I would say it's very good for probiotics, because as I said, that even if it's a dry powder, there's still some water in it, and with that kind of little water, it will help probiotics to survive. Chocolate, like a cocoa powder, it's fat soluble. But of course, there are other factors that we need to consider. Among all of the bacteria, probiotics is very good at anti-penetration. For lactic acid, usually the number is about 4%. Oh, thank you very much. Second question. How to differentiate the products? For example, there are certain requirements for bacteria for food. For chocolate products, there is no E. coli requirement or metrics. But I know that for some really good businesses, they will test the E. coli and the bacteria in their chocolates before the product is shipped out of the factories. So, what can I do to differentiate the good microorganism or bacteria and the bad? In other words, for some business, they want to differentiate, and they want to apply the research that you did in the universities. Well, that's a very practical question. Indeed, we had those kind of situations. You develop a new product, but then you have a problem with the standards, because the standards set by the government are lagging behind. It's the same with the probiotics. I wouldn't say they lag behind. I would say there are very few regulations and that can apply to you. The national regulation has a certain criteria for microorganism, but these are for disease-leading microorganism. But now you put into probiotics, but this is a good bacteria, it's not a bad bacteria. However, it does not comply with the regulations. So you have to go around the regulations, especially when it's about local regulations. So some people say that we are selling solid drinks. But one thing is that probiotics in our labs that we use for R&D must be listed in national list. In other words, it is approved by the government to use at least as a lab, and then you can use it as a supplement in your products. So sometimes your product can get approval, but not always. If they do not approve it, then it's very hard because they have the say. Because they say no way, then there is no way. For some provinces, it's okay, but for other provinces, in product does not go to the market. But I think the key is that the regulations should be updated. I have a question. We talked about there are all kinds of different lactic acid bacteria, but what about the source of those bacteria? From the pickled vegetables, preserved vegetables, and are there major differences because of the different source of those bacteria? And you talked a lot about tests on cadmium and lead. Do you plan to do it on human body? And third question is that from the lab test to the real application and the launching of product into the market, how long do, according to your estimation, will it be? Well, first, the source of probiotics. Safety, besides efficacy, safety is also something you have to consider. For example, whether it will cause some problems, cause some diseases. Probiotics used in food are mainly from, first, a healthy human body, and second, traditionally from fermented food. But the original claims that it should be from a healthy human body, for example, feces of a healthy adult, or feces from the newborn babies. And we know that a lot of those bacteria, healthy bacteria in our body, are from our environment. For example, the food that you take, the environment you live. If this is a bacteria that is in a human body, in the intestine, and is from traditional food, for example, yogurt or preserved vegetables, they are also okay. Second, probiotics is special. In food, health products, and food source, we see it all. However, there is no requirement for human body test for food. But if you want to test efficacy, to get a patent, animal test will suffice. But if you have a test on human body, then it's even better. But for this kind of commercial things, commercial business, you need test not only on animals, but also, I believe, on human body. Only that way it can be convincing. For those functional health products, they are not medicine. And they used for those so-called sub-healthy population. However, if this bacteria is going to be used in medicine, for example, Peipeikan, produced by Shanghai, in Shanghai, then you have to follow the regulation on medicine or drugs. You have to do the first and the second clinical trials, etc., and the cost is huge. In fact, we are also planning on this as well as cooperation with business. Otherwise, we cannot afford such kind of projects. Have I answered your question? 2 questions? Last question. In the interest of time, last question. Professor Chen, through your PowerPoint and your answer to the first question, I don't see the answer for the mechanism of how probacteria work. The way you said, human body is complex. Probiotics is also complex. And I found that it seems through your PowerPoint that your study focused on the removal of heavy metals, the result, instead of the mechanism. So I'm asking, have you ever done tests to find out the mechanism of how those probiotics help to remove those heavy metals? Maybe it's because of a binding, or it affects the absorption of heavy metals of intestines somehow. So my question is, what is the basic mechanism, working mechanism? Is it because of binding? Or is it because that it generated some kind of things in our intestines, and therefore it helps to remove the heavy metal from the human body? If that's the case, then the next step is about gene engineering or genetic engineering. And to us, genetic engineering should have a bigger potential than probiotics. So my question is, do you have any plan on this? Well, when I say removal of heavy metals, it's a broad definition of removal. I talked about the 4 areas, 4 dimensions of removal, including its content, etc. I will not elaborate on it. I think your question is about the mechanism of removal of lead or cadmium, etc. from blood. I didn't talk about it in the PowerPoint. Well, we use the blood circulation to remove the heavy metal. We did test first on lead, and the blood lead level dropped. However, you may think that the probiotics will stay in the intestines. How come that they can remove the lead in the blood? Well, we did lots of tests to prove it. And in our papers, there are very elaborate explanations of how we successfully remove those heavy metals from blood by using the liver and blood circulation system, or the liver and intestine circulation. And the probiotics, it has a very strong binding power. It works like a worker who moves all of those heavy metals out of the body. So that's the answer. Well, thank you, Professor Chen, for your excellent presentation.